I don't know how to convince producers not to sign those deals, but the producer was so excited to get that $500. They signed away their rights, and they could have made $100,000 if they had just spent that $500 on a lawyer, right?
I see that once a week where someone will reach out. I'll tell them this is a bad deal. You shouldn't do it. You're only getting $500 in exchange for locking in for however many years. And the amount of times I hear back, oh, I did it anyway. Like, we'll talk later, is insane.
Adam Freedman, lawyer extraordinaire, the most dangerous lawyer in the producer community, not to producers, but dangerous on behalf of producers when it comes to the people that want to play with us. I guess unless you're a producer that wants to play with other producers too, and then you'll defend them. How are you doing, man? It's been a while since we've had a conversation.
Yeah, I'm good. Fully back in it. How are you?
Life is good over here, but I also didn't make the mistake of giving away my email address on a Busyworks stream. Why'd you do that, man?
He had the best of intentions trying to get me some more clients, but he just gave out my email with maybe not enough context.
My bad. I thought you had given it away. I'm like, he has 1 million subscribers, right? You're giving away your email address I wouldn't even give my email address away on my live stream. And you did it in front of 1 million producers, potentially.
I learned that the hard way. I learned that lesson.
I mean, some of those emails are hilarious. And to be honest, I get emails that hilarious without ever having given my email address away on a Busyworks stream. So I think a big theme of this conversation is going to be fear. And looking at producers have a big problem with being scared. And the two main points I want to talk to you about is, one, producers are scared to negotiate. They're scared to negotiate on their own behalf, to get money for beats, to get fair splits. And two, they're scared to get lawyers. And that creates a really terrible situation for producers. It creates a lot of problems for us. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, for example, and this happens to me way more than it should. I have people contacting me, producers saying, hey, I just got paperwork from a label. Can you review it? I can't afford a lawyer. So it's like, number one, you're telling me, hey, I could pay this lawyer, but instead I'm going to ask you to do it for free. Super disrespectful. They don't see it that way, because people just of course they're entitled to my time. But number two, they're also putting their faith and fate in the hands of someone who's never been a lawyer a day in my life. I've never been a lawyer. I have no business reviewing a producer contract. So say a producer gets a placement and it either comes with a contract or, the song just drops and they don't get paid or they don't get any paperwork either. Either way, they need a lawyer in either of those scenarios. But they don't have any money. They haven't gotten paid yet. What should they do?
I guess step one would be reach out to lawyers, because there's no harm in reaching out, just being honest with people. Someone will probably take you on for a back end percentage. Someone will just take you on believing in you. Or just talk to them and see what the scene is like. And then if you don't know where to go, if you don't know how to find a lawyer, ask your friends where to find lawyers. And even just back to the situation you were talking about, we can, even assuming someone's not so audacious to say, will you be my lawyer for free? Will you just do me a favor and review my paperwork? But if they're just asking you a question, like, what do you think about this? A lot of people are just asking their friends and then just going off of whatever they say without even thinking about it themselves. That's another big problem I run into.
Well, yeah. And the thing is, and I've heard horror stories. I know a couple producers who have personally signed contracts and then realized after the fact that they've signed their way out of potentially $1 million+ dollars. I mean,
I've seen it too.
Yeah. And they don't recover from that, honestly. So it's really one of those things where you're trying to save, I don't know, $500 now, and you end up losing 6 figures to 7 figures later because of that. Because, I know people, they'll ask their uncle works for the court system or something, or they'll ask their cousin because their cousin's college educated, but their cousin has a liberal arts degree. They're not they've never passed the bar. And even if, you know, for example, you ask your lawyer friend who practices real estate law, a house and a beat have incredibly different intellectual property elements attached to them. So they're not even going to be competent enough to figure that out. It's really, you are a guy that has focused on producers, and there are unique challenges that come with producers. So people really should, you know, work with an entertainment lawyer who understands the music business and the music business today more than anything. I mean, how do you stay on top of all of the changes, with all the changes going on with streaming, everything going on? You have to stay on top of that, right?
Or just going back to what you were saying before, do you think the issue is people, like producers that you see, they don't know like what a lawyer, like what an entertainment lawyer does for them? Like where is the value for them? Or is it just being kind of too scared to reach out to anybody?
I don't know. I think a lot of it is just not wanting to spend any money. I really think it's that. And probably they don't see the value, because that maybe subconsciously that's what it is. There's this dilemma that they're dealing with in their heads, where it's like, yeah, if I really wanted to scrape $500 together, I could, but what is it really worth it? And then, yeah, you get that $1,000 advance, if anything, and realize that the label just made $1 million off of that track, and you're not seeing any of that because, you know, maybe a lot, there are a lot of tricks. I don't want to run through all the tricks, but what are some? I think
just hearing these stories, it should just be enough for people.
You would think, right? What? Give us a story, because I know you've seen some sneaky things go down. What's like one sneaky trick that has stood out to you? A scenario in which a producer kind of was tricked into signing a bad contract.
I'm trying to think of one where I could think someone was tricked or just didn't know any better. I saw Daniel with producer royalty just had Kyle from BeatStars on there talking about buyouts. I have an example in my head where my client co-produced a big song that went platinum. Turns out the co-producer did a flat buyout for $500 and lost out on exactly what you're saying. So those stories.
How much do you think he lost out on? Like, just to make it real,
like $100,000 at least.
But okay, so this is what I'm talking about. Because I've had these conversations with producers. They want to take that 500 so badly because maybe 500 is the most they've ever made, right? Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of what I was thinking in my head when I was thinking tricks, because this has happened to me before, where someone will say, all right, just sign this deal, but you need to do it within the next 24 hours. Otherwise, you're not making the album, knowing damn well that you're making the album, even if you take a year to negotiate. But they'll say that to you. And so the producer's like, man, I really could use that $500. I want to buy a mic, whatever. So they just go ahead and sign it. I don't know how to convince producers not to sign those deals, but the producer was so excited to get that $500. They signed away their rights, and they could have made $100,000 if they had just spent that $500 on a lawyer, right?
I see that once a week where someone will reach out. I'll tell them this is a bad deal. You shouldn't do it. You're only getting $500 in exchange for locking in for however many years. And the amount of times I hear back, oh, I did it anyway. Like, we'll talk later, is insane.
That's what I mean. And then they do contact you later and they're like, how do I undo this? Right.
Yep.
Can you undo this? Is there any hope?
A lot of the times, no. Like, you signing a shitty contract is no excuse to get out of it. It's a legally binding document.
Yeah. And I think the other fear too with getting a lawyer is that if you tell someone, hey, I got a lawyer, they're going to stop working with you. Does that really happen?
I guess I'm not so much in the conversations like with the artists, but no, that's never happened in my experience. But I mean, sometimes when the producer is like an actual personal friend with the artist, that makes sense why they'd get turned off by bringing a lawyer in. But other than that, unless you're like good friends with the artist, there's no reason.
Yeah, and if you're good friends with the artist and you suspect,
they should understand business. Yeah.
Well, they should understand business, but also if you're not having that open conversation with them about the business, how good of a friend is that person? Right.
Oh,
and I think
right.
there you go. That's another trick.
That's another classic trick. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess the trick that I see getting done, and I don't know if I should blame the labels for this or just greed in general, but people will, there will be these third-party companies, maybe an artist manager or an artist imprint, something like that. The artist is signed to a label, but they'll issue a producer agreement and say, all right, we're going to pay you $1,000 for, blah, blah, blah records, LLC, and we own this. And you sign that deal and it's transferable. So then they just deliver that to the label. And then when it drops on the label's like, well, you didn't sign give you a bad deal. This third party gave you a bad deal. They just transferred the ownership to us. And now we're going to drop this song and make millions of dollars and you can't do anything about it.
Yeah, I guess I haven't seen that so much specifically. Like, I guess what did you have in mind with that?
That happened to me. I'll forward you the email. The crazy thing, and I've spoken on this, it's a conversation with Gold Haze about a song that we did that actually was a gold single on a platinum album. So after the fact, it got handled, but it got handled by contacting and paying for a lawyer. And that lawyer actually worked on a commission, which I think is pretty common, right? Like virtually every lawyer I've ever worked with has charged me after the fact.
Definitely. Everyone's flexible with at least getting paid out of your producer fee, just knowing that the money is coming.
Yeah, and it's not even that much. It's like, if you get paid $5,000, maybe they want 10% of that. So it's not anything crazy because, generally, I don't know, you tell me, are producer agreements that difficult to parse through as a lawyer with experience?
Man, I honestly tell people this all the time, that if they just read through these documents, it's basically the same every time. So even if you don't understand the first one, you could work with a lawyer, ask them questions and stuff, and then maybe you take on more of the responsibility yourself once you're more comfortable, because it's the same terms every time, just written in a different way.
Yeah, and I mean, that helps both parties, right? Because you do your job faster, but then the producer themselves have the confidence going in to have those conversations with you. You just say like, look, this is what I want it to be. Can you make that happen? And then it's very clear and straightforward.
Totally. I like working with clients like that who have their opinions and have thought through these things themselves before even coming to me. I like that a lot better than someone just being like, oh, what do you think? Oh, let's just go with that. I don't like when people blindly trust me. It's because it could lead to them realizing down the line that they actually got into a bad deal because of something that they didn't even think about.
Yeah. I mean, they should ask questions. I guess that's why that person emailed you and asked you how to make a dope beat with FL Studio. Yep. But you never. I'm here to ask the hard questions. How do you make a dope beat with FL Studio?
I thought someone else asked me like, just what is Afro music? Like I'm not the worst person to possibly explain that.
Okay, I see you're not going to answer these questions. All right,
I'm going to give the political answer, change the subject.
I'll tell you another weird legal story, and this is ongoing. It hasn't gotten resolved, but this has more to do with loop makers. So I make beats and I make loops. There was a major placement that I found out about 2 years after the fact. A really dope song released on a major. I didn't know it existed. It was taken from one of my drum kits. It was a loop. And I have really clear and straightforward information about splits written in those kits because I just want to make it easy. It's in plain English. It's not legalese. And when I contacted the loop maker, they were like, yeah, well, the label sent me a contract and I just didn't understand it. So I just never replied. Weird. But that's, again, that's on me. It's getting handled. But I know a lot of loop makers have different issues and different challenges than more established producers. And there are a ton of loop makers now all kind of rushing into the gold rush of the placement game. Do you represent a lot of loop makers who get placements with bigger producers?
Yeah, I represent a lot of loop makers who have now established themselves, but have been through all sorts of the issues like you're talking about.
Okay, what are some of those concerns? So if you're a loop maker watching this, what can you anticipate dealing with?
Well, that exact story that you talked about happens to my clients like every other day, it seems like. They find out about a placement. Oh, the main producer just either responded and signed the deal without telling them, and that doesn't count either. That doesn't help either. Or just didn't respond and didn't handle it either way. Yeah, that happens all the time. Or just sending out the loops to multiple people. What happens if the same song comes out with, or two different songs come out with the same loop? It's a whole nother can of worms. Trying to think, what else? What else did you have in mind?
Well, that's a good. I didn't think about that one. What does happen if a loop maker sends out the same, which they do all the time, and two different songs use that loop and they're about to drop?
Totally. I was actually just talking with this guy Elias from the writer for Billboard. We were talking about this exact issue as it relates to beat leases, because this is a big issue. There is no clear answer here. A lot of people don't realize what happens if two songs come out with the same beat or two beats with the same sample, because one of them is going to do YouTube content ID on the beat. It's going to claim the other song with the same sample. It's going to be a problem. Most of the time, though, the song being claimed, you're only talking about like small time people with minimal views, so it's not really an issue. But every once in a while, it's a big song claiming another big song, and then you got a major problem.
And you've dealt with that?
Yeah, it's a problem.
How did it get resolved?
And it's situations where it's a big song and a big song had to work out settlements. My clients had to give up a piece in some cases because for the first song, they just signed a typical producer deal saying the label has all rights to the beat now, they have ownership. So he couldn't really give out the same sample again. So it really was his problem, technically speaking.
Okay, so you would have to, if you're a loop maker.
So the way to avoid that is in your producer agreements, make sure you're only giving these labels non-exclusive rights. Daniel and Kyle from BeatStars talked about this a lot in their last podcast, this specific thing. Are
labels pretty open to that stipulation, or do they resist?
They're pretty open to it. Sometimes we get pushback on it, but it just kind of depends how much the artist wants the song to come out. Sometimes the artist might say, oh, that's a deal breaker because in hip hop I have 50 songs. I'm picking the best 20. So they might think it's just lame or whatever, and there's nothing you could do. But most of the time, it's totally fine.
Well, I mean, that happens with samples all the time. So is a workaround for that just treating it as sample clearance?
100%, exactly.
Which I guess probably costs more for the label.
Why do you say that?
Because then they have to pay a clearance fee on top of some kind of split situation. Whereas you would have to do that anyway for a co-production situation.
Yeah, advance versus license fee.
But I don't know. Typically sample clearance is pretty expensive. Typically a sample that someone is getting cleared is owned by a label anyway. And so it has to pass through all these publishers, all these writers, all these labels. So then the fee continues to go up. Whereas if
it's treating your loop as a sample where you're the owner, yeah, you don't need to go through those hoops.
Do you find labels are more open to sample clearance than they are co-production if it's a sample that's been used before?
Well, if it's a sample that's been used before, legally, you can't then give someone exclusive rights to it.
Well, if it was used the right way.
I mean, because it's a wash in the bottom line, they're usually pretty open to it unless just for whatever reason someone doesn't want to do it. Like, okay, I'd say 90% of the time they're cool with it.
It's usually an artistic concern, not a legal concern.
Correct. Or every once in a while you might deal with an old school lawyer who's more cautious about that kind of thing. That might be one of the reasons. But yeah, most of the time they're just totally cool with it because it makes perfect sense when you really break it down.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of old school people in the music business that are completely against beat leasing. They don't understand that they're against these loop and sample pack situations. They only want to deal with the old school way of doing things. But then it also feels like there's a lot of new blood in the music business, and are you starting to see more progressive deals being made with producers where major labels are getting beat leases, or they're working out non-exclusivity for beats and samples, that kind of thing. Is that on the rise?
Non-exclusivity in terms of sample licenses, like we were just talking about, they're pretty open to that, so I guess it's on the rise. But in terms of progressive deals, I don't know about that, because producers are still getting the 3% producer royalties, so they're still bottom of the barrel ultimately.